this virtual space. Yeah, thank you for taking time to meet with us today. We wanted to celebrate you and ask you a couple of questions about your work in harm reduction. Carmen and I are the co-chairs of the Intersectionality Committee, and this month we decided to do a virtual blog post instead of doing a mosaic piece. And so you are our first guest being interviewed. And yeah, I guess we just wanted to start it off kind of casual, ask you how you're doing today, your pronouns, preferred pronouns, and yeah, how you're feeling today.
Hey everybody, thank you for having me on. My name is Mohawk. My pronouns are they, them. And how I'm doing today is it's a little early, so we're still picking up momentum, to really get everything the ball rolling so I can, be at my best today.
Totally, same.
Nice.
I'm hungry personally.
I'm
That's my
glad that's
preference
not,
also.
the issue on this end. I've eaten plenty this morning, and now I'm just, waiting for my body to synthesize, metabolize some mood regulating chemicals and energy.
Definitely. Yeah, so we're just going to ask a few questions. It's going to be a pretty short vlog, but we want to just ask you, to start us off with your journey to the harm reduction world. And you can go as, make it as brief or as long as you'd like, but just letting us know sort of what the roots are for Mohawk. Where did this work start, and where are you now?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I could start by saying that, I was not exposed to any of this stuff growing up, really. Like most 90s kids, we had the DARE program. That was not sufficient to learning anything useful in life. In fact, I had a huge crush on my DARE program instructor, so that probably was distracting. And I jokingly believe that that might have contributed to some level of being like, ooh, female cops are hot, but not really. eh, from afar, very, very, very from afar. But yeah, so like like everybody, mostly probably had very similar experiences of not really being exposed to accurate drug information, realistic drug information. We all believed all the propaganda that was circulating at the time. Um, and like it wasn't really a thing that happened much in my family, at least like not my immediate family. So I didn't really have any context when I came, started to come into contact with different types of drug culture. And so when I did, at that point I was essentially a college student. I was like a straight edge kid all through high school and everything. I had friends that smoked weed and did acid and this and that. But I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's cool, whatever. Like, like it just kind of didn't phase me. I didn't really understand it anyway. So I was like, whatever, cool. Like they're doing drugs. Didn't really help me learn anything. But when I got to college, like party life kind of happened. I went to a college that was ranked number 2 in the nation for partying at the time, and so that was a hot mess, a shit show. I very quickly spiraled into that culture because I played rugby, and rugby is a heavy drinking sport, like social drinking sport. Um, and from there, I just kind of got into all kinds of drug taking activities. And so by the time I am an adult out in the world working and partying and stuff, I just continued to come more and more into contact with it because I was also a raver and into rave culture, and also like rock and roll, metal, all that stuff. Like I was heavily into music culture and going to shows, concerts, raves, you know, bar dance, EDM, whatever, gay clubs, all the stuff. So like, we're doing all the things, having fun, living our best lives because we're young and invincible. But then at some point I was like, maybe I'm not so invincible. What's going on here? I'm taking these substances. I'm getting the things that I think are supposed to be fun. Like it's like, oh, I had this pill this time. I want to get another pill, and I'm like, why are all these things different? Like, why do they feel different, even though I'm being told it's the same? You know. Um, so I started like I'm a nerd at heart. I started getting real curious about okay, I thought I was getting ecstasy or LSD or whatever, and the experiences seem to be inconsistent. What's happening here? I just started googling around. And actually at the time, which was probably maybe even around 2011, I came across the website. It's now called drugsdata.org, and they have a lot of they're like the only FDA or DEA licensed facility for drug checking in the U.S. And they were started and are now maintained by Arrowippo, started by DanceSafe. So um, when I found that website and they listed out all these different pills and concoctions and all the ingredients in them, I'm looking up some of the stuff I think that I'm taking, and I'm like, well, I think that I had this pink star or blue star or dolphin or happy face or whatever thing, they had so many stamps and this and that. And I'm like, but look at all these other ones that look very similar to have wildly different ingredients. And once again, I'm curious. I'm like, okay, so what is this? So I'm Googling some of these ingredients. And the internet at the time sort of had information. It's not as robust as it is now, but a lot of times when I would find the information, it would be very vague. And I still didn't have a full understanding that these things that are being substituted in actually still have different effects that may not be desirable, that may be more harmful. Um, and I was young and reckless. So, like, I'm seeing all these different ingredients and I'm just like, ooh, these sound fun. Like, let me try these other chemicals too, because you know, they're supposed to be ecstasy or they're supposed to be whatever. And I just kind of assumed that all of them were equally fun or, you know, uh, kind of easy to use or whatever. And through a lot of my experimentation with some of that, realized that some of it's absolutely crappy. And, you know, there came a point where I was not enjoying my experiences. Some of them felt, some of them were kind of like, I think that this could have been a really bad choice to have taken this because, I feel very unwell or I'm like experiencing these side effects even after the fact. So like I'm kind of going through all of these all this kind of like trial and error with experimenting with my own substance use and no one really being able to tell me what's going on. I'm just trying to do my own research and figure this stuff out. And, even then was still kind of like not fully, getting the full picture. And so, actually spoke to a promoter one time, like someone whose events I was attending regularly at the time, and I was like, yeah, I'm learning about all these different chemicals that are floating around, and people might be taking them unawares, and like, why isn't there anybody talking about this stuff? We're all doing it, so why is there no information about this, or the information's really sparse or hard to find or not fully accurate? Um, and he told me about DanceSafe, and he was like, oh yeah, DanceSafe does work like this. They, like DanceSafe has different chapters that are run by volunteers in different parts of the country. And at the time, there was not one in New York. So he was like, yeah, DanceSafe does this type of stuff. And so I started looking up DanceSafe and getting in contact with some of them and learning about some of their peer education that they do. And then after running into them at a festival, when I started traveling around a lot for festivals, I actually saw them in action. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I've been looking on your website. I've been, sort of in contact with somebody, and Bunk Police had their website up at the time too, and they actually let me step behind the booth and just like interact with people for like I don't know 15, 20 minutes, like I was a volunteer. And after that, I was just like, oh, this is so exciting. Like people, like the conversations that I was always wondering about not existing are being had here. And from there, on out, I was like, I want to have these conversations. I want to open up these conversations because people seem to be scared to talk about it, or they think they know everything about it and they're wrong, or they've been misinformed, like most of us have been because of what we were taught growing up, or what we hear from our peers when we're engaging in certain drug taking activities. And then kind of like after a series of various personal, like individual efforts of like doing this type of education, like when I would go to events, I was like, let me start the Dance Safe chapter or restart the Dance Safe chapter in New York and get, see if we can get this mobilized again. Because I was in the scene here in New York City, and think, like there were some bad things happening. There's a lot of exposure to things that were very harmful for people. But then also there were some good things that happened too. But like, it's still important to have the knowledge around, like, all right, how do you maximize the good parts, of this experience, or how can you, avoid the things that might not agree with you, or just in general aren't very safe to do at all. And so once I kind of like once I basically got in touch saying, hey, I want to start a chapter here, turns out there were already tons of people who wanted to be involved but didn't want to be the one to lead the charge. So things just kind of fell into place from there after that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I remember Bunk Police. My first music festival, they were out there, and it was funny because I remember thinking, are these really Bunk Police or these narcs? You know, because they were like, we'll test your drugs. I'm like, no. And
Right.
So, yeah, that's super
I just
cool.
I had a question. I apologize if you already went over this, like when you're talking about school, but did you have a science or like STEM background, or did you just kind of discover you had a knack for it once you got interested?
Yeah, it was more of I had a knack for it, I guess. Like, I always liked science, growing up. Volcanoes are cool, and stars are awesome, and like, basic stuff like general science. But I actually did very poorly in stuff like chemistry class because I'm not very good at math, and that actually heavily discouraged me from going into certain fields. Like, I thought I might be an architect, but then like geometry was my worst grade, and I was like, this probably isn't a good idea, you know. So like, I had an interest in science. It was actually kind of funny that you mentioned school, because like I had a wellness class my junior year of high school, and all of us were required to do a project on a drug. And I forget, I think you just kind of had, I think you were like randomly given a drug that they gave us. And you have to kind of like write about the drug. And I, again, coming from a background having no real education around drugs, and only knowing of what I was exposed to in media and dare, and even the general anti-drug propaganda. I also had, cousins and things involved in like drug selling trade and everything. So like, I had like a weird kind of perspective on it. Like, but ultimately I knew, I was like, stuff around this is troublesome, so I should probably just avoid it. But like, I had to do this project on ecstasy. And when I'm like looking up stuff, I don't know, I'm kind of old, and some people watching this might be of a different generation. But when I was looking around for information on drugs on the internet in like 2003, maybe, um, the weirdest stuff came up. And part of like, but what ended up happening was I kind of unintentionally created a harm reduction presentation, because what I ended up finding was that it's like, oh, drink water, do these things, take breaks, rest. Like, there were some people out there, I guess, who felt the need to, educate people around it, because like the rave scene was super, like between like the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, that was probably its peak before the laws passed, the Rave Act, which ended up putting a damper on a lot of that type of nightlife. And so there, like, I ended up like doing this whole presentation about like, ecstasy does this, like very scientific. It does this, this, and this. And if you take ecstasy, do this, this, and this. And then we also had to like provide like some sort of media clip about the drug. So, whereas some people might have like pulled a scene from a movie or TV show or a commercial or something that might have made it look like really wacky or really dangerous, like those old commercials of like, this is your brain on drugs or whatever. My media clip was um Green Velvet's song La La Land. And it is a hilarious song. Like, it is just, I don't know, like one of the lyrics in the song is something about these little pills, unreal, the thrills you yield until you kill a million brain cells. Like, everyone in that class is freaked out. They were weirded out that I they were like, what is wrong with them? Like, my wellness teacher was just like, she always had this frown face thing going on. And she was just like, at some point, she like pulled me out of class, and she was just like, are you okay? Like, we can talk if you need help. Like, everyone was concerned for me because I did this presentation. I guess everyone thought I was on drugs or something. I don't know. But anyway, I didn't have a STEM background. I definitely did have an interest in like science, and it didn't come into fruition until after I, pursued an entire career in technology, which is, sort of a science background when you think of like computer science. But like my mom's a microbiologist, so it's like that was to me was like science. Like this is like you're in a lab. Um, and so, it just kind of like it just happened. And then when I started learning about drug checking and stuff, like that was my favorite thing. It's still my favorite thing. I love working with the machines and like analyzing the chemicals and doing all this stuff. I don't know. I'm like super interested in that, and I realized that I might have missed a potential calling by not catching on to that earlier.
I mean, there's still time. People.
Yeah, there's still time. There's still time, y'all.
You're
If
doing
anyone's
it.
watching this video, like I know how to use, an FTIR spectrometer.
Right. And I was actually
That was
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that you tell us more about that because you like love it. That's your thing. That's your
it is my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing it's like as far as like harm reduction education goes. I mean, yeah, I love talking about all the topics, and I'll talk about policy, and I'll talk about you know, um, people often like ask advice about how to like most safely use things, how to make the most of an experience, but also like minimize any consequences and stuff like that. But like my favorite thing is to someone just like hand me a chemical, and I'm like sitting there with, whatever it is and doing all the beepity boop and stuff with the technology, and then being like about what the results are, and then being able to share that and explain that. And even with the reagent kits, which for people who may not be familiar, those are just little bottled chemicals that can change a different color depending on the molecular structure of what's in the substance. And there's like a bunch of little reagent kits that have a whole variation of types of substances they can test for, and that's kind of like the first line of defense for like getting an idea of what might be present in whatever you're taking. So, for a lot of people, it's taking something like MDMA, but it's heavily misrepresented with something like synthetic cathinones or whatever. It's like you can usually differentiate when you clearly don't have MDMA um, with, like a cathinone or even aspirin or whatever other BS people try to use. But like it's gotten to a point, um at least in the US, especially just because of prohibition. It makes everything so complicated for the drug selling markets, that just more and more misrepresented, adulterated garbage circulates. It exasperates the problem of inconsistent inconsistent substances being distributed. So once I started to learn about the machines that can do drug checking, and how in like I believe it was Canada. I think I've probably heard about Canada first, and then maybe the program in the UK called the Loop. I started to learn about those programs. I even volunteered with Anchors in Canada at Shambhala Festival in 2015, and started to see how these other organizations do these like harm reduction approaches, and like have all this funding and support to really invest in the analysis, like the chemical analysis. And I guess it was probably 2019 now, where I was just like, I will literally fly to wherever you are if you will teach me how to use a spectrometer. Just show me how to use it. Like I will take off of work or pay or do whatever I need to do. I want to learn how to use this machine, because everybody else seems to be using it, or some version of it. And it's so much easier to understand what's in these samples, these chemicals that people are purchasing, than using these reagents that just turn colors. And sometimes I was getting to a point where like so much weird stuff was popping up. I couldn't, like, it was just inconclusive information. I'm like, I have no clue what this substance is. Well, we definitely know it's not what you thought it was, but like some people want to take it anyway because they're like, oh, I spent money on this, or I was really trying to get high tonight, like I was trying to have fun, like is there some way I can take this and it's gonna, it might be okay? I'm like, I can't even tell you because I don't know what it is. You know, and I was feeling like that limitation was, it was frustrating because I want to make sure that people are being as safe as they can, and they've already taken the steps to um, have the, drug checking done, and I can't give them any answers. So that's a little frustrating. So I started to learn how to use the machine, um, and by the grace of very kind other harm reductionist folks that I will not name just because there are probably legal reasons that I cannot, but they let me borrow their spectrometer in 2019, in the end of 2019, for a week. I went and picked it up from them in another city, flew out with the thing, came back to New York with this thing, and set up like a little lab in my room.
And you also brought it to that conference you came through at Columbia University, right? I mean, that's where.
Yes, that was actually my first time being in direct, in the room with, and that Columbia University conference was organized by Carl Hart. And so like he basically invited all of the global drug checking agencies to come and give basically presentations around their findings and their research, and their thoughts, and kind of to share how things are going in other countries, because obviously here we're not doing so great. We're failing at protecting, vulnerable populations who are going to use drugs, and we are criminalizing them, which is only causing more harm. So like that was kind of like my first um, in-person kind of experience with it, and I was like, wow, this is actually kind of simple. And I mean, like there's a lot of calibration and stuff you have to do, but that's just a matter of like using the machine over and over and getting used to how you have to do it. Like that's just lab work, so anyone who ever has to do something like that understands like this is just part of the process. But using the machine itself actually isn't like incredibly complicated. And so that's when I was like, okay, this is cool, it's here, it's like who can teach me. And then I believe what we were able to do when we had the conference in DC, the Empyrean conference, I believe we were able to get the spectrometer there as well, and that's where I sat with the technician who was operating the machine, and it was like, show me how to use this. Like, it was a pretty chill, low key thing. I was like, show me how to use this. Let's, I brought a bunch of stuff. Let's go through what I have. Like, it was none of what I had was illegal. It was just random stuff. I just wanted to see how it worked. Like I had like ADHD medication and stuff. So I learned it doing that way. And then after that, I basically was like, all right, cool. Let me see if I can do this again. And I will, I know how to run the machine. Oh, and I also went to like another little conference where the spectrometers were, and I got some more hands-on stuff there. So, that gave me some more background to be like, okay, y'all know who I am. Y'all know that I know how to run this machine. Can I borrow it? So I borrowed it for like 5 days, brought it back to New York City, and basically it was just like, everybody in New York, like, it's Halloween weekend, come through, I'm going to test your stuff. And we also like got someone to kind of run around the community and all of his connections, pick up baggies of heroin, like everything he could find like off the street, and we just ran all these samples, and like accumulated a lot of information around kind of like what's going around in New York City. And that was like a really good experience. Like I got a chance to really get familiar with the machine. We, ran dozens and dozens of tests, lots of, good information that kind of came out of it, and kind of like help us understand the drug markets right now. And yeah, like, it'd be great to, I mean, like I have the data, I haven't really done anything with it, but it's kind of like I was hoping that with that initiative, people could see that this is valuable, and like, I can present this information. Like, look, this is how many people, had what they expected to have. If they didn't, maybe they chose that they weren't going to take it or distribute it, because some people who did testing were also selling things. So like, it kind of helped people make informed choices whether or not they were even going to engage in using the substances, um, as well as just like, um, I don't know, like while like sometimes it's just there's downtime. You know, you gotta wait for the thing to process and this and that. And we have like good conversations. You know, I get to do a little kind of like one-on-one exchange, and they can get some more information around like safety or benefits or whatever. So yeah, that was like a awesome experience, and I'd love to keep doing that. Also done a bunch of drug checking in South Africa, like for 2 years in a row. And yeah, like I just want to keep finding opportunities to do that. Hopefully someday someone will just give me a big ass grant for a spectrometer or something,
Yeah.
figure out someone I can collaborate with to have access to that so that we can make sure that people can do drug checking at the minimum,
Yeah.
like while we're kind of in this position of not being able to, have these regulated substances. We need to be able to know what's in them.
Mohawk, I think we should just aim for 2021 for you to get that grant. I think we're connected to a lot of people that have a lot of wealth, and I don't see why they can't support one of our longest harm reductionists in the community to get access to a awesome tool like this, right? I mean, it's not just for yourself, but you're trying to help others. So whoever's listening to this, if you have connections, Mohawk is looking for a grant, please. Or we'll take Venmo donations.
New York City Department of Health, are you out there?
Are you out there? Who do we know that works there? But also, I mean, people can send you donations, right?
Yeah, I think yes, but I'd also have to, with the companies that supply these analytical machines, there might have to be, I would have to see the logistics around it, because it's not like you can just go to, like Best Buy and get yourself a spectrometer, like
Right.
you have to do a lot of negotiation with the companies. Like these suppliers do not just like,
Sure.
I guess they probably want to make sure it's like some legitimate use. I'm sure there's reasons for it. They're usually supplying things for like pharmaceutical companies, this and that.
Right.
So there's always this negotiation that happens, and I'm kind of in the middle of conversations with people who are doing those negotiations. So even though like I'm not buying one, I know kind of what the process is just from seeing email threads or seeing, being in the like rooms with these people, the organizations who are, acquiring these machines for their companies or for their agencies and nonprofits. So like it's definitely a process, but I am getting a sense of like the costs, like the kind of the best practices, what to use, because like the libraries that kind of that have all the information around the drugs that can be scanned, some of them, those costs, there's like all this proprietary stuff where there's a lot of financial red tape basically. But I'm learning, and if it's possible for like a quote unquote individual, I mean, I'm sure I could, be sponsored in a sense by a nonprofit, a harm reduction nonprofit, or technically New York Dance Safe, because it is a harm reduction nonprofit. Like it is registered. Yay. I did that for these types of things to be able to happen. But, I think it's possible. I don't know if it'll be easy to just collect donations, because it is like a $60,000 piece of equipment.
Well, what I'm saying is you have a Patreon, right? And a lot of the work that you've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, has gone unpaid, right? And so we're in a time where we can put your Venmo and credentials on the blog post. And if folks want to support your work, and if we need to fundraise $60,000, a dollar per dollar, we could do it. I mean, we ideally know, but I think that it's possible. Mohawk.
Yeah, I think it's possible, and I'd definitely be down to collaborate. Like kind of the big thing with fundraising is usually just like the bandwidth, because you gotta keep engaging people to keep giving, and I personally just can't do that on the side of all of my other responsibilities alone. But it's definitely a conversation I'm open to having.
Cool. So we're closing up on the hour. Okay. Yeah, and I wanted to just leave with one question, but Carmen, do you want to do another question?
I feel like our questions might be similar. Is this about experience and being a Black harm reductionist?
Yes.
Okay, cool. This is a vibe through the screen right now.
maybe I can share mine, and then you can, if it's not what you were thinking, then then Mohawk, you can pick whatever you want. But the question that I wanted to add, or leave our audience with is, it is Black History Month this month, and we are celebrating all the incredible Black harm reductionists that exist and that are part of our community. Yeah, I'm curious to know, what can you speak to around that? I know that you're doing right now a project that's really beautiful, highlighting of folks in drug policy and harm reduction. And I think you share with me like the struggle, right, in finding folks. What's that about? That's my question. Carmen, do you have something similar, different?
So I'll just tack on a little end to that, just like the discussion with the machine before, like, given that these aren't really commercially available, like, I guess, how does that inform your process of like getting that information back to the community?
Yeah, so I mean, right now there's not like a lot of there's not a lot of public conversation about it. There's a lot of internal conversation about it, and actually like an ongoing conversation active right now where it's kind of like, can I continue to borrow y'all stuff at least in the meantime? Is that trust there? Is the potential funding there? Like, are you comfortable with that? Like, how can we continue to collaborate? Because there are a number of groups that have the spectrometer, and DanceSafe, I believe, just purchased theirs or are still in the process of purchasing theirs because they did do a fundraiser, but they only have two. And like, right now due to COVID, we're not having events and stuff. But normally the challenge is that like these end up getting deployed to festivals and a lot of things happen at the same time. I can't have access if it's going to be somewhere else. So like, which is what happened with the Halloween thing where like I couldn't use DanceSafe spectrometer. I had to ask another agency. And because theirs is funded by their local government, they technically weren't supposed to let me do that, but they did. So like, I will have those conversations more when I feel like it is possible to fundraise or bring something in locally that can be used for those same purposes. And then I will definitely make sure that people understand like this is exactly why we need this much money or this many resources or these types of resources, because this is not something I can just go pick up and then like it's just here. There's like more to it. And then Oriana, can you kind of restate your question again?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's Black History Month. We want to celebrate the incredible Black harm reductionists in our community. And I know that you're doing this awesome project right now. And I think you've mentioned to me that, it's been a struggle in some ways, not because there are not Black harm reductionists, but because finding coverage on the internet about the work that they've done is few and far between. And so I know that it's a lot to ask that you share this in a few minutes, but whatever aspect of my question you want to touch on, sort of the challenges in your project and or what it's like, looking for other fellow drug policy and Black harm reductionists. And yep, that's it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you basically said it. Like my belief around some of the obscurity of this information is, well, two or threefold really. One, it's that it's extremely risky for us to be open about this stuff as it is. It's extremely risky to exist and mind our business. So it's even riskier to admit that we are engaging in activities that are illegal or things that could be seen as illegal, like me handling illicit substances. Super gray area. The drugs themselves are illegal, the analysis itself is not, and sometimes there's protocol around that for the safety of everyone, but still it's like super challenging. Using the drugs, challenging obviously, but openly admitting that, you might get people just got to deal with all of that. It's risky, it's scary. So I understand a lot of people are doing work and it's underground, and so it's like I can't just go googling like Black harm reductionists or Black drug policy reformers, and even when I do, it's still hard to parse out like we're a minority here, like in all senses of that word. Like there's so few of us as a population, and there's even fewer of us doing this type of work, that like I really am leaning a lot more on the fact that I've been doing this for 8 years now, that I know some people. And I'm hoping that in knowing people, they also know some people that maybe I don't know. And I've been getting really connected to that community digitally, really, because there's no other great way to see these people out and about. And even so, it's kind of like I'm here in New York City, and yes, there was a time where I had the financial, capability to go to conferences and stuff. But that stuff, like conferences, be like $300 just for the conference, and I got to fly out to another
$700.
city. Yeah, it depends on how long it is. Sometimes a weekend's 300, but a whole like week 700. then you got to fly out to the city. How much the plane costs? How much the train costs? How much the lodging costs? You know, so a lot of times I was able to get some scholarship from working within this directly, but I still had to cover the rest. And so like there are people who just can't do that, and they're doing like grassroots work or something where they can't access conferences. Now it's getting a little better because we are using technology to make it more accessible because we can't do things in person. And I'm sort of hoping that that overall changes the landscape for engaging, you know, activists and advocates, you know, advocate work, so that we're not like, oh, we're going to go book this giant hotel and conference center out somewhere and make it all flashy or whatever. Let's just do 100-person conference call and like, you know, discuss things. So like that's, yeah, it's definitely been a challenge because I think one, like I said, it's risky for us to be doing this work, you know, visibly. Two, it's just the access is not there. And you know, and three, like I think there's still a lot of us who are just getting into it, getting our feet wet, but there's not like the number of like quote unquote experts is very small. You know, like at this point I feel like I started to do this project 'cause I just read Carl Hart's most recent book, and I thought it was great. And like most of his takeaway message was that like everybody needs to come out about their drug use, come out of the closet about your drug use. Black folks, everybody, just do it. Like all of us being able to like talk about this openly, like yes, there's risk, but the more of us who are talking about it, the more it's normalized, the easier it'll become, especially to advocate for ourselves and being able to use this. It's happening a lot in the psychedelics community where there's more black, you know, like healers or however you want to call them, like therapists who are learning the psychedelic psychotherapy type stuff. Like they're slowly coming in, but again, those are people who have access to privilege. You know, they have the money to do this, they have the education to do this, they have the connections. You know, they know like Rick Doblin or whatever. Like those, you know, they're the ones that are most visible. But then there's folks like myself who might not quite be as capable to, and like I'm loud and out about my drug use, but I also don't like, I'm also not a professor and neuroscientist and researcher and have books out in my name and, you know, like 1,000 Vice articles like like circulating my information. So it's just like I'm trying to find more people like me to highlight with that little project, as well as like some big names, but also like now it's like, all right, got the big names out of the way. Who in our local community should be noticed, you know, for this stuff?
Yeah, thank you, Mohawk. I and Carmen are so grateful that you came, and I would encourage anyone listening to this, if you want to hear more, Mohawk is joining us next week at 8 o'clock Eastern time for the first half of our meeting. And yeah, I wanted to thank you so much. I don't know, Carmen, if you have anything else left. I think that's it on my end, and I'm also 6 minutes late to my next call.
You're good. Yeah, thank you so much, Mohawk, for your time and for your work. This has been really incredible.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Talk soon.